tonight from the Netherlands is the investigative journalist, researcher, and nutrition industry consultant whose book, Health Claims Censored, has inspired freedom-loving people to seek an end to Europe's censorship of health information. Please welcome free speech advocate, Bert Schwitters. Welcome, Bert.
Good evening. What can I say after all those wonderful speakers? My view, of course, is a distant view, because my view is from Europe, from Holland. But I have always found in your founding documents so much truth and so much inspiration that I hope that I can contribute something as a Dutchman to this evening. Of course, thank you, Jonathan, for having invited me here. And tomorrow I will even get an award for work that basically takes place in Europe, where I'm fighting the European bureaucracy, which, enacts regulations much worse than the ones you have over here in America. Now, my father was a newspaper man, and following his professional footsteps, I also worked as a journalist for television, radio, and the printed media, until I began selling dietary supplements. So for me, freedom of speech and freedom of thought formed a natural part of my upbringing. And in the beginning of my professional life, it was like, freedom of thought was like water to a fish. You don't notice it, because it's there, it's your natural environment. It's probably for this reason that once I began my career as a businessman, I experienced as a straitjacket all the regulations that dictate what you may not and what you must say and what you must not and may not say in commercial communication, because commercial communication seems to differ from normal communication. Now, while I had the interests of my potential customers in mind and at heart, I found that I couldn't say anymore what I wanted to say about my products, because consumer advocates, politicians, non-governmental groups, nannies, bureaucrats claim to know better than me what I had to say and what was in the best interest of my customers. While I was fulfilling consumer needs, they were busy, in the words of the Frenchman Frédéric Bastiat, to lay their hands on the law. In 1850, the French political economist Bastiat defined the law as the organization of the natural right of lawful defense. The law, he wrote, is the substitution of collective for individual forces for the purpose of acting in the sphere in which they have a right to act, of doing what they have a right to do, which is to secure persons, liberties, and properties, and to maintain each in its right, so as to cause justice to reign over all. 47 years before Bastia published the law, 56 signatories representing the 13 United States of America agreed in the Declaration of Independence that no party shall lay its hands on the law to take from one party in order to give to another. The states declared that there exist self-evident truths. In the original draft of the Declaration, these truths were qualified as sacred and undeniable. One of these self-evident truths holds that all men are created equal. The original draft says equal and independent. It is from that equal and independent creation that all men derive certain rights, inherent and inalienable. In the final version of the Declaration, its authors introduced a creator who endowed us with these unalienable rights, 3 of which are explicitly enumerated in the Declaration: life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. What makes this part of the Declaration so interesting is that it was written by men, and that these men held that certain sacred and undeniable self-evident truths form an integral part of man. In other words, when you see a creature endowed with life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, it's a man. I use the word man here in the classical meaning, including, of course, the ladies. Man is capable of living since his creator endowed him with life. His creator also endowed him with liberty, which gave man the freedom of choice. Last but not least, man was endowed with the capacity to pursue happiness. This is how the authors of the Declaration of Independence saw and defined man. Most importantly, the creator of men made sure that we're pretty much stuck with these truths and rights. Because no matter how hard we try, we can't get rid of them. We can't separate ourselves from them because they are unalienable. Men cannot act other than by making choices. Choice is a self-evident and universal a priori that is inherent in all individuals. Choice cannot follow an act. Choice always precedes the act. Genuine choice can only exist where the freedom of choice exists. Genuine choice involves the freedom to choose to act or not to act, as well as the freedom to choose to be or not to be acted against. Freedom of choice goes hand in hand with the fundamental right to be let alone. Quite logically, where freedom of choice exists, social as well as commercial relationships will always exist on the basis of mutual consent. So, where mutual consent between individuals is lacking or interfered with, the freedom of choice is violated by the force that one actor uses to overwhelm and coerce the other. What the overwhelmer often overlooks is that in using force to coerce other individuals into non-consensual relationships, he forfeits his own freedom of choice. By his act to coerce, he forfeits his right to resist being coerced by another, stronger overwhelmer. The result of this is mud, barbarism, warfare, tyranny, and the collapse of civilization. Governments use force while simultaneously maintaining the unconditional right to resist being acted against. For the purpose of exerting unlimited social control, governments claim, construe, defend, and apply a monopoly on the use of force. This is why the state has no other option than to relentlessly maximize its power. To this end, it will always opt for expanding the collective at the expense of the private sphere. The state, as totalitarian master, must inevitably aim at annihilating the individual. The state and its allies, who seek to lay their hands on the law for personal or commercial benefit, or because they seek to establish some utopia, must promote the state as an entity prior to and greater than the sum of its constituent individuals. The founding fathers, your founding fathers, and their political and philosophical allies held the opposite view, that the state's legitimacy derives exclusively from the consent of its individual creators. In the Declaration of Independence, they explicitly stated that governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. Not all men agree with the Declaration of Independence. They fear that when individuals exert the unalienable rights they're endowed with, some individuals will profit less from them than others, so that some will have more happiness than others. In the name of social justice, they actively undermine and pervert not only the Declaration of Independence, but the Bill of Rights and the Constitution as well. They create support for destroying life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness by promising happiness without pursuit. They redefined the right to pursue happiness as a right to be free from unhappiness. They transformed the right to pursue happiness into an entitlement to happiness without pursuit. This opened the door to forcefully taking happiness from those who successfully pursued it and redistributed according to the rules of social justice. Providing, offering, and accepting happiness without pursuit, meaning someone else's happiness, equals criminal behavior. Unless, of course, one has the consent of the person whose happiness is being shared. When someone freely chooses to share some of his happiness with others, that's called charity. And if it's not charity, it's theft. It doesn't matter whether someone else or the government did the stealing, and whether the stealing was done in the name of social justice. Someone was forced and coerced to surrender part of the happiness he pursued so that it could be given to someone who did not or failed to pursue it. Freedom implies acceptance of judgment, of choices made and outcomes of activities undertaken. With faith in God and religion, by accepting or knowing self as transcendental, come judgment and freedom. It is this freedom that we can get rid of, even if we want it, because it is unalienable. He, however, who accepts the promise that judgment can be avoided forfeits his spiritual self. This is why the idea that there can be happiness without pursuit not only destroys freedom, but also desecrates the religious foundation of our common and high cultures. In 1928, Associate Justice Louis Brandeis wrote, "The makers of our Constitution, your Constitution, undertook to secure conditions favorable to the pursuit of happiness. They recognized the significance of man's spiritual nature, of his feelings, and of his intellect. They knew that only part of the pain, pleasure, and satisfactions of life are to be found in material things. They sought to protect Americans in their beliefs, their thoughts, their emotions, and their sensations. They conferred against the government the right to be let alone, which Brandeis defined as the most comprehensive of rights and the right most valued by civilized men. The spiritual self is the locus of sacred and undeniable truths and unalienable rights. This is the source from which sprang the United States of America. These truths and rights are sacred, and those who seek to destroy them are in fact destroying the vision that man is a spiritual being. The political pillars upon which the United States of America rests were erected in accordance with this vision. That sacred vision burns in your founding documents. Please, let no one extinguish that sacred fire. Thank you.